Hi, everyone. About a week ago, I shared something from my morning Bible reading, and I wanted to do that again today because just the other day, I started a new book of the Bible. Not that I haven't read it before, but having spent months in the Gospel of Mark, I completed that finally, and now I'm in First Samuel, Shmuel in Hebrew. And something struck me today as I've been reading a section in chapter 1 that I'd like to share with you. So the story that Samuel begins with is we have this man by the name of Elkanah. It turns out he's a Levite, Leviim, and one of the Leviim, and he goes every year to the tabernacle Mishkan, the precursor to the temple that would be built many, many years later. It's in Shiloh, and he goes with his family every year to make these special sacrifices. He has these two wives, and I know culturally that's so different from us, but it's just stick with the story for a second. His two wives are Penina and Hannah, and he favors Hannah over Penina, but Hannah is barren. She doesn't have any children, and Penina does have kids. And what ends up happening is Penina mocks, provokes, makes life difficult for Hannah because she doesn't have children. Elkanah tries to comfort Hannah to no avail. And so one of the times when they go to the Mishkan in Shiloh, Hannah begins to cry out to the Lord. She is a mess. In fact, the way she's carrying on, the high priest, Eli, thinks that she's drunk. She seems to be going on and on very emotionally. She's not really making any sounds, but her lips are moving. And he confronts her. Eli confronts her, says, "Put your wine away." And she explains to him that, no, she's very, very troubled. And in fact, the term that she uses in explaining how she's feeling and what she's doing is, she says in Hebrew, Divarti kimarov, I'm speaking with great sichi, out of my great anxiety or concern, v'kasi, my provocation, my vexation. Now, when you read this over quickly, we may not catch what she's really saying here. It might sound as if she's simply telling Eli that she's so very troubled. And we might think what she's troubled over is the fact that she has not been able to conceive. She hasn't been able to have children. And that is likely there, but that doesn't seem to be the main thing that has caused her trouble. The real trouble that has brought her to this point, and her prayer is asking for children. She actually prays that if God would give her a son, she would dedicate her son to the Lord for the rest of his life. She makes something similar to what's called a Nazirite vow. But for now, again, that's beside the point. She's crying out for a son, but her cry for a son, we might think, is simply because she can't have kids. And if only the Lord would give her kids, then she would give her child to the Lord. But that doesn't seem to be the thing that is really motivating her. What's motivating her is the pain in the neck that her rival wife has been. And the way I discovered it, is I wanted to check out the Hebrew words from what she's saying. In English, she talks about her anxiety and her provocation. And because I have a special interest in anxiety, I wanted to see exactly what this was saying in the Hebrew. So when I looked at the words, I realized, especially the second word translated my vexation or provocation, vakasi, or vakasi. This seems what she's really complaining about is her horrible oppressive experience that she's been having with her rival wife. That, yes, in those days, it would be seen as shameful for a woman not to have children. And again, for us, that's besides the point, as you'll see in a second. The issue that was motivating her to pray with such passion was because she was so being made fun of by Peninnah. That's the thing. So it appears that instead of praying, "Oh God, get her off my back," she was praying, "God, give me a child," because then that would resolve in her mind what it was that she was being made, mocked about and all the rest. The point of this is, she had a situation where she couldn't have kids, but that didn't seem to lead her to cry out to the Lord for a child. It was the suffering she was having to endure, unjust suffering, from Peninnah. And it was that drove her to, "God, get me out of this mess." So the provocation from Peninnah, her being such an annoying pain in the neck, led Hannah to pray in this way, which then resulted in the giving of a child. Now, you could philosophize or theologize all you want to how this works. Like, if God really wanted to give her Shmuel, Samuel, why didn't he just do that? But it doesn't seem it works that way. Very often, God allows us or brings us, I don't know how it works, into situations where we get to that desperate point where we cry out to him, then he answers, and then he does these incredible things, not just for ourselves, but very often, in this case, for the whole world, because Samuel was the beginning of the great line of Navaim. I think that's how it's in Hebrew, the Navi, the prophets. And he was the very first one. It was through him that the kingdom of Israel was established. He was the one who eventually would anoint David to be king. He's a very important figure in the Bible and in history. And his coming into the world is rooted in a situation where this woman was being provoked from someone else. So the point is, this is another case of what we read in the New Covenant writings, the New Testament, when Paul says in Romans 8:28 that God causes all things to work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. A story from the Hebrew Bible that I'd like to refer to, and as an illustration to that, is Joseph. When Joseph says to his brothers at the end of the book of Bereshit, Genesis, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." Again, how that works, I don't know, but Joseph understood that God had the upper hand in all that he had suffered from his brothers all those years, and how God leveraged evil for good. And so for people who know and love God, no matter what happens to us, God leverages evil for good. And I've gone through issues in my life where I've looked back and saw things that were so hurtful, where I've been let down, where I went through very, very difficult things, and saw how God leveraged those bad things, those bad things for good. And I never saw it here, where Hannah was driven by something so upsetting to plead with God, and how God used that. In this time, COVID-19, it's a terrible time. And we read these stories not so that we could look back on some things that maybe we're still struggling with and feel bitter about. We should do that. But also for right now, no matter what we're facing, concerns, or we're truly suffering at this time, or we know people that are suffering, that we could look to God. We could look to him and trust that he will use all the difficulties that we're experiencing or will experience for good. But many of us, in the name of trusting God, are actually fatalists. God will do what God will do. I'll just trust him. That's not really what he wants. What God wants is for us to be like Hannah. Respond to the difficult situations by crying out to him. She says she poured out her soul to the Lord. That's soul in the Hebrew scriptures means life. She's pouring out her life. She's almost giving up her last breath, crying out to God. That's how miserable she was and how desperate she'd become because of her situation. I don't think we have to wait to get to that place of desperation, before we cry out to him. Let's start now. Don't let it pile up. Let's cry out to God and see how he will use the situation that we're in.